Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We'll get yourself seated. We'll get underway, please, and welcome. This is our 7th meeting of the Facility Advisory Committee, so if you're tracking, that goes back to April because it's a monthly meeting, about 2.5 hours each time, which is the general idea of what we're thinking it'll be again tonight. My name is Joe Schrader. If you don't know, I serve as the facilitator for this. I'm not from the community. I'm a Wisconsin-based education consultant, and I'm happy to work on this project, even though it's a very difficult one, obviously, because, again, we want to do these things in a deliberate and responsible manner, and that's what people have been trying to do. So, again, thanks for everyone who's here. Thank you for the committee for your continued work. Again, we are believing we'll be in 8 meetings, so this is our 7th of 8, and we're going to have a number of things to accomplish today. This is our agenda, and once we get underway, the biggest thing is probably item number 3, and that is where a lot of the process has been kind of working towards, and that's trying to determine if there is a specific recommendation around school closure at the elementary school level for the system. I believe this will be the last time we'll be talking about it because we have other things we have to do to wrap up our work. So again, that'll be item 3 as we get to that today. If there's some direction from the committee on that, which I think in one way or another, it's just a matter of how specific the recommendations might get. We'll be getting to item 4, which will also involve some table time discussion and then input regarding any boundary adjustments that might need to happen if there is school closure. So again, how would the students from a school that's closed perhaps move in with among the other schools in the system? And then after that, we'll look at a draft of the report to the board. Again, this task force or committee is advisory to the school board, duly elected representatives of the taxpayers here. So again, the FAC makes these advisory recommendations ultimately in the form of a report. Again, tonight's the draft look of it. You're going to see members. We already sent it out ahead of time, so you take a look at it before the meeting. So again, we'll be looking at table time to talk about it, give input around it, etc. That'll help the planning team figure out where else it needs to be adjusted before we get back to our November meeting and with final edits and such there. So that's what we're going to do. Again, a full evening as usual. So let's get underway with that. So let's start with, particularly because we have a number of people here paying attention in person, maybe in the next room, whatever, just watching later, just engage, which is great. Again, I appreciate your interest in this. We want to make sure that people are kind of tracking what's happened, and it's a good reminder for people on the committee as well. So last time we met, we really were around 2 items. One was trying to refine the elementary school consolidation options, and particularly about are there particular 2 schools that might be recommended for potential closure to the board. And then the second part was refining secondary facility options. And you'll see committee members, some of that work, some of those recommendations are already in part of the draft report form, which you'll get input on later. Most of the evening was really around a long discussion around item 1, which led to some things we did between that meeting here to help us continue to move along. So if you're here last meeting or paid attention to it, you would have seen that this is kind of trying to track in 4 columns. Again, going back to May, some of the conversations. So May was our 2nd committee meeting. We already had some preliminary feedback about priorities around facilities from the community survey that went out in the late spring. And so in May, the committee was starting to use some of that preliminary input from the community to start thinking about which schools might be the most credible ones to think about if closure is needed in regard to those emerging criteria. The criteria continue to add into things from policy, board policy, etc., and we continue to talk through. So again, and what you can start to see is some of the similar schools were showing up across the months. This is actually, I think, now the 5th month, 6th month that we're actually talking about this. In fact, 6th month, because this slide shows that we, again, kind of the developments, it's the same slide except the last column. So again, just so you can track it, these are the things, this slide was actually in last meeting. We were kind of showing the evolution from meeting to meeting around the elementary consolidation options. And then this one was just an update that showed kind of inconclusive, really, about where the committee was. I would say that's how I would describe what you see in the last column. Is there was a mix of feeling about which options would make the most sense. Again, inconclusive. What we're trying to do is see if there is consensus in all our decisions to the board, And so we're going to try one more time to see if there's a consensus around that. And if not, we move forward with what we have. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So every time we meet, we have an exit slip feedback. And so, again, I'm not going to read all this to you, but what went well, what could be improved, what we're going to learn more about. The planning team has at least 2 meetings between every one of these monthly meetings, and we look at that. We take it into account with the next plan, with the resources you see. I think you'll see that play out today as well. So we also have a mechanism called the QR form or question response form. It's usually been used by facility team members or FAC members here, but we've also allowed it for people who are attending, who are just in the audience. And then again, Dr. Engel and the team here will take all our stuff, and maybe if you're interested, you've seen in the website, district website, there's a space for just all the work through all the months of this committee over the past year, including these things. So you can see all of them. So there's more than 3 that come in a month, but usually we'll highlight 2 or 3 that seem to be maybe things that maybe a couple people had questions about or what have you. You're going to note that the people on these 3 that we're going to highlight for this month that came in from last month's meeting are not on the FAC, but we're audience members, I'm assuming. So one of the questions was there an error in how the busing costs were added up in the table? And yep, there was an error. And essentially the numbers here were in fact which was negative, which was positive was mistaken. So again, that was an update. There's a correction there. So again, and I think that was clarified to the members on the committee too. The second part was Sarah Kratt had asked, if our district claims to be equitable, why are we possibly closing the schools who serve our underrepresented population? So the district's response to the question would be, while we certainly recognize that some schools serve more students of color or those experiencing poverty than other schools, the school district strategic plan for educational equity is not founded on providing schools in particular locations to serve unique groups of students. Rather, the school district's strategic plan for educational equity is rooted in developing educators who are knowledgeable about the students they serve, implementing strategies that benefit all students, but intentionally lift those who need the most assistance, and providing financial and staffing resources equitably. A third question that came in was, how will busing costs change over the long term, say 5 to 10 years, if elementary schools are closed? And then how does that compare to the deferred maintenance costs over the same time frame? And that kind of is another way of getting back to some of the stuff here and elsewhere when people are trying to make sense of all that. So just kind of a narrative way of thinking about it through Corey's other question. So here's, in bullets, there's the district's response. So as an example to the question, the estimated busing savings of closing Northwoods is $70,000 annually. The estimated savings in deferred maintenance for Northwoods is over $750,000 over 20 years. As a result, the estimated 20-year savings, if you look at that together, $70,000 annually plus, right, is $1.4 million for busing and a 20-year savings of $750,000 plus for deferred maintenance. Closing Northwoods yields an estimated net savings then of $2.15 million. As another example, the estimated busing change for closing Emerson is an increase of 3 routes or $210,000 annually. The estimated savings in deferred maintenance at Emerson, it would be $2.9 million, et cetera, over 20 years. As a result, the estimated 20-year cost is $4.2 million for busing and a 20-year savings of about $2.9 million for deferred maintenance. The closing of Emerson yields an estimated net cost of $1.28 million. So again, a lot of numbers there, but that's a good question. I think that was a good matter of a number of our FAC members too. We're trying to sort that out. Short-term costs versus long-term costs, busing versus deferred maintenance, all that stuff. Real costs versus deferred costs. But again, that gets at the heart of some of those things that people are trying to, I think, sort out. So regrounding. So again, in general, we've been trying to work from a funnel, really exploring, evaluating, refining. FAC members tonight, when you look at the report that we're going to have you talk about at tables, you already hopefully had a chance to look at it in your packets. I mean, you look at the first 10 pages of that is really a lot of the funnel. It's like all the stuff you had to explore to try to even get at some of the recommendations, at least 10 pages of summary. So that's a lot of that wide part of the funnel. Evaluating is things like we talked about. We're trying to look at, right, the parameters, the input from the community survey, your own insights from questions raised, like we just looked at QR response forms, to get to refine. So like tonight, I would say the 3 items before us tonight, seeing if there's a consensus around 2 schools for potential closure would be the refinement stage for this group. Like, I think this is the last time we really can take time to do it because we've been talking about it for 6 months. I think when you talk about attendance boundaries with wherever you might go, that might be at either an evaluation or a refinement stage. Maybe we might be able to, we haven't talked about it as much. Maybe we're up that just a little bit. We'll see. It depends on what comes in from your team discussion and feedback. And then I think the draft report for sure is more of a, let's evaluate the first draft and then let's get into refinement next time. So again, I think these are examples of where you see where we are with different tasks that the committee has to do. We have 3 big tasks left, is my point. Elementary consolidation options is the one where we're refinement. Again, the idea of any boundary adjustments with those possible closings, second. And the third one would be the overall report for the whole process is the third. So those are the tasks we have left, which is why I say again, I think we need the consolidation option recommendation. If we have a consensus tonight to no, because we got these other things we got to get done yet, to still honor the 8-night commitment you have and the timeline that we've been sharing with the community and the board and everything else too. So making sense so far. Any questions from the committee? Just kind of catches up on that. Okay. So again, this is maybe for people who are just kind of tuning in maybe more recently, and if it's the case, so a common question is like, why do we have to do this? Why would we have to possibly consolidate from more schools to fewer schools? And consolidation, does that ultimately mean closing schools typically, right? So there are some financial reasons that are very clear. One is ongoing declining enrollment. Second bullet around significant financial challenges, even with successful referendum, because the long-term financial challenges transcend the ability to borrow every so often for more tax dollars from the community. And then lastly, excess space in district buildings, so there's a capacity for that. One thing this board has heard, or the committee has heard from the beginning, is with that though, there also would be some instructional benefits from this that are perceived. One would be that with more kids in fewer schools, you'd actually be able to balance classrooms better, which have fewer splits. There'd be better, more time for collaboration of staff to better serve students, and less windshield time or travel time. So when staff are working, they're actually with kids more, and cars traveling between schools less, particularly for our students, teachers of some of the areas that would be in the arts, et cetera. And then student access to their teachers would be improved too. So there are some parts of this instruction that could be beneficial, where the group's kind of seen that so far. And just an update, this is the first time committee, you've seen it as well. So there's a kind of a third Friday of the school year, a standard date on the calendar for school districts to determine what their enrollments are, which go into funding and et cetera. And so again, the latest is again, we just said this, right? One of the trends is ongoing declining enrollment. So the most recent information or data point is the district continues to decline about 174 students. Through a lot of the, if you look at this, the second point on there, 104 of that is through declining enrollment, where where the incoming kindergarten class is smaller than the exiting senior class, that sort of thing. So again, the enrollment trend of decline continues, which is again feeding into one of the primary reasons for the committee needing to exist and work through these challenging conversations. So one of the things that looked at again, we're just about done with the background, catching people up, is this idea of closure. What might it be? What would be the scope of it? Quite honestly, when the committee first gathered, I wasn't sure if I think people were rightfully saying, I'm not sure we have to close any schools. Tell me why we have to close schools. And then they started learning more, and they say, oh, okay, I guess I see that now. But then it was a question of, okay, if we're not going to close any, then how many would we close? 1, 2, or 3? What would be warranted? And it seems like going back, if you look at the minutes, and which I do, I kind of come back, I would say from about the second, third meeting on, it's been pretty clear. This group's thinking about 2 is about the right size. And it got confirmed back in August when we actually had your input come in. If you might remember, we had 21 people here. The full committee was here that had been regularly attending. And over 90% of you that voted said that 2 schools would need to close based on what you're assessing. So what we're clear about right now from the committee is that there should be, that there will need to be some closure because of some of the real challenges before the district. We just talked about a few. That the optimal number would be 2. And then also going back to, I think back to the June meeting, and for many months now, this idea of a paired idea. So there's 2, there's one from the north side of town, if you will, and one from the south side. So we've gotten clear on those 2 items, the number of schools, the north-south pairing. That's been clear consensus for some time now from this committee. The question, again, I'm not sure where the group is. We'll see tonight if we can get clear, because it wasn't clear last time, was are we clear about which 2 schools this group might recommend? And if there's a consensus, then that'll be helpful to the community and the board to talk more about this. If you're unclear about it, then again, there'll still need to be conversations about it. But again, it's just more to me, from my view, is are you clear with some consensus that can be helpful to that process a little bit more specifically, or it's going to be a little more inconclusive, and then that's just the way it'll be. So we'll see where that goes. I'm not sure where it'll go till we see where you are tonight. In terms of the process, this is the process again. So the FAC makes recommendations. They don't make decisions. I want to emphasize that again. This group, they know it. Hopefully everyone can just make sure you hear that. The FAC makes recommendations. They are an advisory body tasked by the district to do this work and make advisory recommendations to the, ultimately to the board, duly elected representatives of the taxpayers of the system. That's the first step. So we'll meet tonight. We'll try to conduct our tasks, finish them up by next month's meeting. And then administration is the next part where they're going to refine long-range facility plans in readiness. They'll look at the recommendations and they'll have to get that ready. Third step will be the school board make all final decisions sometime this winter. But notice at the very bottom of the slide here, and we've talked about this before, but I just want to make sure people are hearing it. So November 27th, November 29th. November 27th will be an input night. It'll be an administrative meeting, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, 6 to 9 p.m. It'll be online, so people can give input from the community about whatever recommendations come from the committee in that report before the board takes action and that sort of thing. And then if you prefer being in person on the 29th, again, 6 to 9, it'll be right next door in the auditorium here. Again, but it would be an opportunity to talk in person. So again, the board may or may not be there. These are not board meetings, they're administrative meetings, but in preparation for, as part of this process of what the board ultimately have to take in. So again, committee role, administration role, community input role, and then the board makes final decisions on this. The issues are real, so again, the idea is they'll probably make some decisions this winter about it, but again, that'll be the board's decision and the timing of everything, and we'll see what happens with the processes that unfolds. Again, any questions on the process from the committee? Okay, so because it was inconclusive, again, committee, we decided, I suggested, again, because I feel really responsible to help this group do its best work it can. As I shared, like last time we met, we talked for over half the meeting about, do we have any recommendations about the 2 schools? And that's the hardest part of this whole process. So not surprisingly, it was a long conversation, and then we got inconclusive at the end. So we were talking about that, and so I was thinking about what I sent out. And so the committee members, you know this. I'm just trying to share this now because I want to be fully transparent with what's going on with people, not in the committee, but who are really interested in this. So what I did is I shared here, so basically what I just said. So it's been clear to me so far, this was after our 6th meeting, we had clarity around 2 schools would need to close, and a north-south pairing was clear. That's why it's green. What was not clear, what are the specific 2 schools? Is there a consensus? And that was inconclusive. Because of that, I said in our planning team, and we had enough time. We had 5 weeks between last meeting and this meeting, so we had a little longer time. So I gave us, which was good, so we all had our work to do. So one thing is I was going to write this letter. Other folks on our planning team were going to get some of the pieces together. So we asked you to do 3 things. And so again, members, you know this. Again, this is for the others just to know. So what happened is we gave you again, we'll share in a second. We gave you this. We gave you again, a summary table of looking at the 4 schools that have been under review for some time now in the process. And on the left side, you can see the parameters that you've been asking, that you've been trying to think through over time. So some of the parameters came from the community survey early in the spring. Some of the parameters came from the board policy that was relevant. And then there's a prioritization of all that was trying to happen. So this is just some screenshots, again, of the first thing the committee members got. Because one thing we wanted to do is there were some busing tables and some other tables that just came up at last meeting, and that was one part of a whole lot of stuff you looked at. So one of our thoughts was we should take the due diligence to pull in all this together, and so that's one thing, was just that you could look at point by point, if you will, with the parameters, each of those 4 options. The second thing we did is we sent out boundary possibilities. Like what would happen if these two schools closed or what have you, what would happen with potential boundaries, et cetera. So we sent out, this is an example. There was one done for each of the schools, each of the combinations. So this also came out. If you remember, this was actually one of the items we were thinking we were going to talk through last meeting, but we got talking so much about the consolidation, we couldn't take care of all our items. So this was then followed up. And then the last thing we did is I asked for the district to send each of you an anonymous survey link so you could provide some input about what you were thinking. So we could and do it anonymously, so it would be on the ideas, hopefully, and that you could collectively, with this information, kind of a summary opportunity, looking at the boundary information for each, looking at the parameters side by side for each of the options, and then looking at the input from each other, that we'd be able to be prepared for tonight's meeting with this, the items we have. So that's what we try to do. So that catches you all up. That's what we've been doing. And so with that, again, I want to say thank you. There were 15 of you that gave input into that anonymously. And I trust, because we got it back to you a week early for tonight's meeting, I trust that you already read it. It's in the packet tonight again. Again, for, this is sort of stuff that gets included in our website and stuff as we go through the process and that sort of thing. We asked you, one of the things we asked you is around this question. So after reviewing the summary table and the information we had sent you, back in late September, gave you about 10, 12 days, I think, to be able to look at it and then say, yeah, I think that what seems most viable to me as I actually think about this is this and this and why. So we looked at all that. And so you had a lot of chance to talk. And again, 15 of you did it, so I'm really appreciative. So with all that background, we're going to get into see if where the group is today. So now we're in tonight's meeting. So this is, again, if I was going to identify the topic that was probably the most one that people had the most interest in, most concern about, whatever, would be this one. Like what schools might be recommended for closing. So I just want to remind you, particularly a moment like this is where you really need to think about your norms, our norms. These were identified by the group back in our first meeting in April. We've been refining them over time a bit. But you've done a fairly good job, I'd say a very good job overall of living this, particularly today again. Again, just take a look at what these are as you were talking about these decisions tonight, particularly. And, so for example, sharing the air, respecting opinions. If someone is different than yours, be civil. Particularly, we're going to make decisions through consensus, again, like we always have. And I want to start on that for a second because I'm not sure where this one will go. When you're a facilitator for something like this, it's kind of a little bit of I don't know. So you're going to tell me. So I do know we're at a point of making a recommendation if we can. So one of the things this could go for tonight is say, like, okay, you had a chance to talk about this for months now. We talked about it particularly long last time. You just looked at a whole bunch of information since the last meeting. A lot of you all had option to give your input to others anonymously and to read that input and influence each other, which was another option of sharing your perspectives, knowing that there are different perspectives on the topic at hand, which is potential schools to close. So after all that, one of the things that could happen tonight is say, hey, Joe, we've shared a lot. I'm good. Let's just see where the group is. Let's just vote and see where it is. Others of you might say instead, I'm not sure where it'll go. We say, okay, actually, I read what people shared. I think something else has come to mind, or maybe someone said something that has influenced me, and I want to speak to that tonight. So you might have an opportunity now to say, hey, I do want to talk about like this option or that for this reason. I think, again, it might be, like, again, I think the most helpful phrase is just to say, you're going to talk about specific school and why. I think that makes the most sense. So, again, you might have some things to say. I'm not sure where it'll go. So, but if you do have anything else to say on the first point, because we're at the point now of seeing if there's consensus in the room. I'm really clear, I hope, right? Like, this is the point, like, are we going to have a clear consensus about which two schools should close on a tough decision, understandably. But do we have that tonight or not? That's what we're talking about right now. So is there anything else to say about that? And if not, I'll call the question. If there is, this is the time to make that point now before we move on to the next step of the consensus process. And we have a second mic if we need it. Again, I'm just waiting. This is a wait time thing here. Anybody else have anything to say on that?
I can fill the space just
Yep,
briefly for the folks that are here. All the documents that Dr. Schrader just shared, they're up on our website, including the anonymous feedback. So if folks want to look at it, it's all there for them to check out.
Thank you. Okay. So I just want to be clear then. So not seeing any comments yet, then what I would probably say is then, it seems then that anybody has something to say on the topic at hand has said it by now, or has communicated that for the group to consider. And then I would be looking to see where people are in their input. Steve, you have something to say?
Just briefly, this is not an easy decision for anybody, and I'm just thankful that as a member of the committee, I don't have to actually make the decision. But I will also point out that there seems to be very clear consensus that based on enrollment declines, that there is clear consensus that 2 elementary schools have to close. The school board will have to make that decision, and that the fairness of the way the communities come across on the last referendum is 1 on the north side, 1 on the south side. If that's all we come out of with this, that's still a success because it gives guidance to our elected officials to make that decision. The third point that I'll make as just an individual member is this is not the end of the process. I would believe that in the next 3 to 6 years, the school board is going to have to make additional decisions about closures just based on enrollment decline. And whether that ends up in the report or not, as a community member, this is not an easy decision by anybody, the parents, the teachers, the school board. And if that's all we come out of this report with, I think people have to understand this is not the end of the process. This is the next step in making those decisions. Based on all the statistics, all the enrollment numbers, demographics aren't changing. Enrollment is declining for our district, and the choices don't get any easier. And then you go to the secondary level, that gets even more tough. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That's why as a teacher, you're supposed to provide wait time, because sometimes people will talk. Anna, congratulations. You're just recently honored, I heard. Okay.
Thank you. I apologize I was not here last meeting. I got the wonderful cold. So I just want to also just take a point to make that, as Steve is sharing, emotions are high. I think us as a committee have been here since April, and this is the first time we have a lot of outstanders, and I know in September you did as well, and community members getting involved and voices being heard. It's in the news more, all of those things. So I highly encourage us as committee members, and even myself, included in that, is to separate our emotions from our decision making going forward. We need to really look at what is best, not only for our school district, for our city, for our children in the long run, okay? And that is at the heart of the decision we are making. So when we look at numbers, not only the financial benefits, right, potentially of this for our district, but also the children that are impacted by this, as well as the city and the neighborhoods and things like that. And so I just want to revisit that and make sure people are separating a little bit of emotion or maybe special, things that a building has right now inside of it. We know those can be rebuilt with supports and different things. We have seen that done in any other school and model. So curriculum inside building things can move, but the actual layout and the location in our city cannot.
Thank you, Anna. Anyone else? Paisley.
So I guess kind of to build on what Steve was saying, I think we really have to look at not just, next year or the year after that, but years down the road. So if there are particular buildings that will need to be completely replaced, I think we have to think about that. And going to a referendum after closing buildings would be challenging, I would say, to say, now we need, $30 million to build a new building after we've closed a perfectly good building. So I just think we have to keep that in mind as well.
Thank you, Paisley. Anyone else? Okay, so let me just confirm. So the group is we're ready to see where the will of the group is on this. Well, I ask you about the 2 schools that you would personally recommend. We have the ballot. I showed you the ballot, what it looked like, so you're not going to be surprised. It looked like the one I told you, we're going to try to see where you are on this. It'll be that. You're going to vote for one of each, one on the north side, one on the south side. We'll see where you are. So we're going to get the ballots out here in a minute. Kelly, maybe you can get those out if you wouldn't mind. While she's doing that, I'll get the tally sheets up on the wall here. So again, one of these for each. Can you please bring it back up? I have a space in the table here. Just bring it up there. Your blue half sheet vote, if you will, right here. And then we'll be taking probably a 5-minute, break, whatever, as you're getting your votes in, we're tallying them, etc. So just know there's food up here if you like once you get your vote in, okay? Don't think like food's an exit slip though. I mean, you can actually have food anyway. Thanks for the break. So if you can't see from back there, I just want. So we had 19 voters. We have 18 members here. We have one person who has had health issues today, but again, we worked with making sure that the person still had an opportunity to provide input, et cetera. So we have 19 members voting. You can see it here. Northwoods, there were, again, this is the question. In fact, let me just read again, for people not seeing what was on the ballot here. Again, the question was this. So it's identify the North Side Elementary School you would recommend for an FAC closure recommendation. So again, be 14-5 for Northwoods, so about 74%, right around there, over 70%. To me, this would be a consensus, a clear consensus. And split, really. So 10-9 here on the south side. Hinton Spence, again, the question, same question, just different options. I'll just read it, though. So identify the south side elementary school you recommend for an FAC closure recommendation. And as you can see, there are 10 recommending Hinton and 9 recommending Spence. So again, as someone who doesn't have a vote in this, I don't live in the community, I just want a good process. I try to do my best to help you, identify consensus where you do. This is what I would see, I say is what I've seen so far on this topic, and our biggest task, which is, as a committee, to make advisory recommendations about potential closures of elementary schools. Again, first, that there would be 2 schools recommended to be closed at advisory capacity to the board, that there would be a north and south school that would likely close, and then on the north side, there would be Northwoods that would close, and on the south, it would be inconclusive at this point. I would say there's a slight majority. Whether the board would say that's a consensus, I mean, I would say that's where the data came in. That's what I see. Do people on the committee see it different than me? Because that would be, to some degree, that would, you're gonna look at a draft report next time that would have some kind of summary of that. It's not gonna be in today's draft report because obviously it just happened. We know how this is gonna play out, but that would be a sense of some of the language that might come in there if that were the case. And can you help me with this? Just for where's it scrolled up. I just want to get in here. So our member who's not here today just had a comment, I think, and just so she's not able to be here, and just again, it's Courtney Loken, so she's just here. So just so you know, Courtney she's a member too, just couldn't be here in person. So Courtney said, for the community to feel heard, I think they need the FAC to reach consensus on a closure recommendation, which is what we're trying to do here. That is the purpose for this committee. It is not enough to me, she's saying, it's not enough to me to settle on one north side and one south side school. We must use the parameters to reasonably commit to a recommendation. So that's her input on that. I think you have on one side, and probably haven't at this point, but again, there's input there as part of the process. I think it's time to move on, unless the committee would feel differently about that, because we have other work we have to do, and that's 7 months into that. Comments, questions before we move on? Okay. So then let me just take a minute. We have to get the next little piece set up. We're going to have to adjust a little bit to the slides of what you gave us input on. So give us 2 minutes, Dr. Engel and I. We're going to talk about boundary adjustments next. So again, in time to get a quick sandwich here or water if you want. I'll see you in like 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Thank you for, again, just taking a moment to get a break as we were adjusting. So again, given your input now, it's time to talk about what boundary adjustments might look like. So again, what we're going to do is have Dr. Engel talk about some of the assumptions built into some of this, and you'll see some of the possibilities. Again, understand that after you have that, we're going to give tables of time to give some input into these, because these are thoughts, they aren't decisions. Again, we want your input. But again, to start with, here's Dr. Engel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schrader. So to start with, I just want to talk about some of the assumptions that we made as we created these boundaries. And so it's all filled with choices, right? It's just choices in this process, and we can adjust those. But we need to start somewhere, and I want to be transparent about the things that we were thinking about in the process. The first thing as it related to boundary assumptions was align elementary boundaries with Ferry Street, which is our north-south boundary for our secondary schools. And the purpose of that is to try and keep kids together, create certainty for families, and align our services and support, throughout their K-12 experience. We've already seen some successes as it relates to our middle school, high school alignment, and we feel we would continue to see that with an elementary, middle, high school alignment. So that is one thing that's kind of baked into this. It doesn't have to be that way, but we feel like there's some positive benefits that could come from it. Second assumption is to limit disruption to existing boundaries. And so where possible, we tried not to change other school district or other school boundaries. So as an example, Summit Elementary isn't impacted by many of these boundary changes because we wanted to keep the integrity of that boundary and limit the disruption to other students in our system. And so that's an assumption that we made as we went through this process. There are some adjustments, and I'll talk about those. General principle was keeping communities together. And that meant three different things: eliminating attendance islands that we have historically used to balance our schools through socioeconomic balance. But those islands do create these odd situations. And as an example, I'll talk about the State Road Island. Hamilton Elementary School, sits in the center of our city. There's an island that buses over to State Road Elementary School, which has been used to kind of balance things out socioeconomically. Well, over time, we have put in place into Hamilton Elementary School a community school. So there's this person who's there to support the community, their full-time job, creating these strong social services and networks for kids that are living right there to elevate their families out of poverty is our goal. Well, you can see the State Road attendance island houses in that from Hamilton's front door. And so there's students that are assigned to a school across town, and they end up not having, maybe as much access to this community school that's right there. And so it makes us ask the question, is that serving its purpose? Yes, we have better socioeconomic balance, but are we providing the service that we want to for students that may have that need? And with a strong choice program, students have the option to go pretty much anywhere they want anyway. And so that's something that we started with, and we can continue to keep islands if we think that's a better strategy. But for these assumptions, we've eliminated those attendance islands. There is one at State Road that's over by Hamilton, and then there's a second one that is north of State Road Elementary School that feeds into Spence. So those are the two busing islands that we eliminated in this process. Using natural boundaries, and those could be physical boundaries, so like where, Bliss Road or 33 or B come out, or off Isle of Plume. That makes a difference in the where a student may be closest, physically, like as the crow flies, they may be closer to a particular elementary school, but when you actually look at where they have to drive to get to that building, there's another elementary school that they probably physically pass. And so using natural boundaries, rivers, Pamel Creek, the bluffs, etc., tried to use those as natural boundaries. And then also like busy streets. If we can avoid having kids cross busy streets, that's a better thing. So whether that's West or Losey or those others, we've thought about those as a part of these boundary recommendations as well. And then reducing busing, if possible. If kids can walk to school, we feel that keeps them kind of in their community and a little more closely connected because there's hopefully greater access as a result. And then lastly, trying to naturally create socioeconomic balance. Trying to use contiguous boundaries that look normal, not like gerrymandered, so to speak, but that kind of capture communities and also balance things socioeconomically. And so that was a thought in this process as well. This particular portion represents some of those impacts. So let's see, does this have a laser pointer on it? Aha. So this square right here represents the state road attendance island, and it is north of this red line, which is Ferry Street. And so in these proposals, its new location would be to be attached to Emerson. There's another portion that's right down here that would be attached to Hamilton. This is a portion that currently goes to Emerson. It's below the Ferry Street line, and so it would be attached to a nearby school that is Hamilton. And here's another portion that's currently in the Emerson neighborhood that would be attached to State Road, and trying to use boundaries that make some sense as far as those roads go. This is an example where we have two conflicting principles here. We're trying to limit disruption to existing boundaries. Well, we're messing with Emerson, but it's also north and south of Ferry Street. We're trying to align to our secondary boundaries. So those are things we just have to think about and see if they make sense for us as we move forward. Appendix D has all of the options that we thought we'd be examining in this process, the various combinations. And the first two options involve Emerson's closure. The second set of options, which are halfway through the packet, involve the Northwoods closure as an option. I wish I would have numbered them. Now that I look at that, I sincerely apologize. You always number your things. I did not do that. Slides are numbered, yes, but the appendix is not numbered. So if you want to dive into the details for this, for the Northwoods Hinchin option, this is kind of the grand picture of what those boundaries look like. And then in your packet, it dives into the detail of that, kind of the roads that were chosen, etc. Some basic notes about this particular option. If Northwoods and Hinchin were closed, the attendance islands are eliminated. It aligns with the secondary boundary at Ferry Street, so that Emerson, State Road, Hamilton boundaries are changed. Talk about the socioeconomic balance that changes with this option, and then the change in busing for elementary students. And then if you look in the packet, let's see, the Hinchin Northwoods closure kind of gets into the details of all of that option. So if Northwoods were closed and boundaries redrawn, the following were considered in the provided option. A section of the current Emerson attendance area south of Ferry Street is assigned to Hamilton, which aligns with secondary boundaries and creates more socioeconomic status. A section of the current Emerson boundary, and it kind of goes through all the details, and I won't read it all to you. You can read it all yourself. And then it gets into the Hinchin option as well. The second sheet in there shows the current boundaries, just for reference. And then the back side of that one will show the current boundaries with some detail. The center of the city, just so you can kind of see that. And then the third sheet shows what the new boundaries could look like. And then on the back side, it shows some detail for some of those areas. And then that continues with a little more detail further south, so you can look at where those lines are drawn, and you should be able to pick out major streets and whatnot in that process. And so the last section in that Appendix D also includes the Spence and Northwood closure. And this is kind of a large picture of that. Similar process to identify change there. Any questions about those boundary options, how they were developed, or specific things before I think we turn to some table time and kind of work through it at your tables if it makes some sense. If it doesn't make sense, if there's questions, folks, that you might generate lots yourself. But any questions up front about what those could look like, how they were developed?
Bring them all. Okay, a few details I'm just noticing, just because I know demographics in our city, a little bit on Bliss Road, going up there, and like you have rim of the city, I think, is that State Road? Rim of the city is going to be a different district than where do you end it? Where did you choose right now? This data where like on Bliss Road, it's very confusing to know where that cutoff is exactly on the maps.
The cutoff is just past the Alpine Inn.
Okay.
And the reason, so these boundaries as you get into the bluffs seem a little funny.
Yeah.
And it's because they were chosen in like 2003 when they created the north-south boundaries for the 45-55 enrollment policy. And so those have been a 2 decades long establishment of our north and south boundaries for Central and Logan. And those are certainly open to discussion in the future, not part of this group's work. But in trying to align to those boundaries, that's why those were chosen. And so Hamilton, State Road, Hinchin, and Southern Bluffs in this scenario would feed into Longfellow Middle and Central High. And Emerson, Northside, and Summit in this example would feed into Logan Middle, Logan High. And so that red boundary that kind of goes along those looks kind of funny, but that has been established for 2 decades in our school district, and people have been relatively used to it.
And then I don't know if you want to elaborate anymore tonight at least, but just on that shift you were describing initially, sorry, confusing on the last slide, your boundary assumptions. Can we just go back so I can mark, you shifted some things around from that was like Emerson, but now would be Hamilton, or I just want to make sure, I don't feel like that's noted anywhere, and I want to make sure I understand it correctly.
Yes, in the detail in Appendix D, it kind of talks through each of those things. But Emerson and all of these examples, boundary is adjusted for that that secondary boundary. So this is the Ferry Street line. Ferry doesn't go through here, so it cuts down to Market. But this orange section, this cutout here, represents a southern portion of the Emerson boundary, including where we're located, which would be, in this example, attached to Hamilton, nearby. And then this portion right here is attached to State Road.
What about your purple?
Purple is the Emerson boundary. And then this portion right here is an attendance island. I don't have the southern portion here for some reason, but it crosses this line as a square and feeds into State Road. But in this example, in eliminating the attendance island, a portion would feed into Emerson and a portion would feed into Hamilton.
But right now that box is like a State Road Island.
That
so
is,
we have, I know there's many, but that's 2 of them, right?
That's
and I
correct.
know more. Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
And then if you look at the Appendix D, the current boundaries, it should show those islands in there.
Jerry.
Hi, just had a question with the, if you go back to that CD option, I believe. Oh, that works too. Yep. Where I believe called the shoe homes up on the north side there. Is there any inclination of why the Crosse River wasn't used as the natural boundary in that area? And those are going down to Emerson instead of up to north side?
Yeah, great question. So in this example, as opposed to using, like the La Crosse River, it encompasses a portion of the former Northwoods boundary going all the way up to this area right here, just past the tracks. The reason for that was it was a conflict between 2 things. One of those things is keeping communities together, and the other one that is balancing it is socioeconomic balance. And in this example, both work. The Shoe Homes is located right up here, and by attaching those students to the Emerson boundary, it creates more socioeconomic balance. If it were attached to Northside, it would further exacerbate our socioeconomic balance. And so that's a choice, right? If they're attached to the north side boundary, it would be closer to their home, maybe more walkable. You still have the viaduct to cross there, which is its own thing. But that's a choice, right? And that's something I would love to hear your feedback on, if that's appropriate or inappropriate. It is further away, but there is a nice walking trail across the marsh that almost feeds it's like 1.1 miles across the marsh straight to Emerson. That said, in the winter, that's a different story. In the summer, that's not so bad. So I recognize that there's challenges with that as a solution to crossing the marsh at any time of year on the road. There is not pleasant. It's just narrow sidewalks.
Anything else for Dr. Engel? Thank you, sir. So, again, this was where we just need you can see why we need a few minutes, because we're just like, we have to kind of look at what you say to talk about what would be a boundary assumption. So let's just do it this way. At each table, there are 2 note-taking sheets. So, nose goals or whatever you like to do, but someone's going to be scribe here for the first one, please. And the questions will be, I think just at the time, I want to give you a half an hour. Since there's 2 options, you're really going to be looking at, again, CB option, right? Northwoods and Hinchin, and CD, Northwoods and Spence. I think you need to look at both, given where we are here with the input that came in. First off, is that making sense? You're looking at 2 of the 4 that you had packets for. All right, so again, CB and CD. Stay with me, please, for a minute. Okay, give me your attention for 1 more minute, please. Then we'll get you talking. Okay, so these are the 3 questions to process. Scribe, please, at each table. So you saw the proposed attendance boundaries. You have them in your packet. So question A, do they seem appropriate? B, are there any specific adjustments you might recommend? If so, why? Please specify, is it Northwoods, again, which option is it? Is it Northwoods Spence? Or is it Northwoods Hinchin when you're making your comments? And is there any remaining information needed to assist the committee? So quite honestly, you could just take the form, maybe the easiest way, and at the top put which it's one of the options, on the back side of that put the other. It's probably the easiest way to 1, 2, 3 get at those questions. Because it's 2 things, I want to remember we're also going to look at the draft report, get your input on that. I think I'm just going to not ask for a report out this time. I'm just going to look for a timekeeper and a scribe, because we're going to take your information. You're going to see the consolidation of that for the next draft report anyway. So timekeepers, let's give 30 minutes. For you to take the task here. Again, one side for one of the options, and then on the other side, just scribble in your responses for the other as well. See you in 30 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back. We're going to transition. Thank you very much. So again, we should have, thank you, Joan. We should have your input sheet from your scribe, just on top of your table, whatever. We'll make sure we'll grab that today. That'll be helpful for us. Again, the planning team meets already tomorrow. We'll meet again after. We meet again typically twice between every meeting. So we'll take your input and start working on the next draft of things as needed. So again, thanks for your input. Did you have about the right time? Too much, too little? How'd you do on that? We were okay? Okay, pretty good? Okay. Again, we want to get you on the way by 8:30, so I just want to take 5 minutes max just to talk about the draft report and option F, a couple other items that have come up possibly if you want to talk about ideas for a report. So if you get into that piece, I'd like you to look at the draft report. You have it there. We sent it out to you in advance of the meeting, so hopefully you had a chance to look at it before today. That was the idea. So. Yeah, again, there's a lot of work here. So again, thank you on behalf of folks for the community on board, what have you, for the time you're putting in, not just the meetings, but also some of the preparation, like tonight in particular. So thank you. So if you notice, first off, the report, the first 10, 11 pages are pretty much trying to take a whole bunch of things that particularly even the first couple meetings. There's a lot of information. The first couple meetings, April, May, and then others as we went along. And so trying to capture the salient pieces, the most salient. So one of the things you might say is, too long, cut it down. Or you might say like, yeah, this is important, this is not. I mean, there's all sorts of feedback you can give. again, looking ahead, this is what we're looking at ultimately. So there's going to be a second draft report. When you get to the time here, what notable strengths do you see? If you notice, the last 2-3 pages are where we're ultimately going to have the ideas about consolidation, maybe about boundaries. You see about secondary program and offerings, the kind of equitable, equal kind of experience and opportunity. Those things that came out of some of the earlier work of the group. So again, you'll see that in there. But the feedback we'll be looking for are notable strengths of the draft report. Any sections of the draft report requiring more refinement. Quite honestly, if one of you who's described, if you want to point to a page or something, you want to mark or circle a section, that would be fine too. It might be an easier way to have that attached with your feedback. And then any specific suggestions for edits or contact or any additions or revisions. That said, the worst thing for a big committee to do is to get locked into every little word and every little cross T. So again, we're looking more conceptual, probably, right? So again, we don't wordsmith to death. That would be very difficult to process. If you something major pieces, again, so that's the idea. Try to keep it at that sort of level. We did have the idea of option F. I want to ask Dr. Engel to come up here on this one. Remember, option F was this idea of trying to maybe look at more than one school, maybe closing one, opening another, that whole long-term piece. So with that, Dr. Engel, a little bit on that.
Yeah, it came up from a number of folks, and it was maybe a generalized feeling that I got at some point, that rejuvenation or replacement of buildings, down the road was something that folks were interested in, and it's something that we could include as a recommendation in this report as it relates to elementary consolidation. If there are buildings that remain in our inventory that need to be replaced or invested in at some point, that could be a recommendation of the committee. It had also come up, like in the future, if there needs to be further consolidation, is there, closure of 2 buildings, building something new a la North Side? That could be a recommendation as well, depending, on what the committee thinks. And so happy to include language in there around those ideas. I didn't flesh it out in detail here. I just throwing those concepts out as it relates to rejuvenation, replacement in the future. If that's something at your tables you're thinking, yes, we want some language around that, I'm happy to draft something, and then when we come back this next time, we can wordsmith and kind of think about scope and context. But those are 2 options that this board or this committee may be interested in that has come up frequently that if you think is important, please let us know, and we can add that information.
So again, that could be added into the scribe sheet that you have here from your team meeting notes. Steve.
Actually, Aaron, that was one of the things that came up at our table, and I know early on when this came up, I was reluctant and not supportive of that idea, but clearly since Hinchin and Spence did not come to a strong consensus, that one of the things that we added to our comments at our table was the concept of closing both and building on Spence in some way, shape, or form. It was one of the reasons that the North Side build was so successful, was closing the 2 schools up there and building something new. Perhaps that's something that the school board would consider in the future. Since there wasn't a clear consensus from at least this group, maybe there's obviously Spence has a much bigger footprint, has a much bigger expense to replace as a building, but that has such a big footprint compared to Hinchin. So we added that to our comments unsolicited by anyone in the room. So.
Yeah, that is something to add if you're thinking about that came up as a result of this, some sort of combination of buildings, spinchen, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but bringing 2 buildings onto one campus at some point in the future, or subsequent consolidations if need be. Any recommendations you have around that or thoughts, or just you could add that as general concepts that you want the board to consider in the future. That's helpful for us as an administration and a school board to provide direction as we think about next steps in long-range facility planning.
Here's Michelle.
I'm wondering if this information would provide clarity between the South Side option of Hinchin or Spence in that closure.
I would offer from my perspective, there isn't consensus about what that specific thing would look like yet, and so that would probably be a longer process, but what, like I said, will of the group. And so if folks think some of those are important to consider, please add those to your sheets, and we'll do our best to create some draft language or options. And if we're hearing multiple things, I can put in option A, option B, and as the group comes back together, you can strike or vote or whatever you think is important.
So that was one thing. Oh, another one. Anna, yes.
I just think with this too, again, getting us brains back to early spring or even summer in some discussions, and we're looking more at numbers and data, we know that eventually probably we may have to be faced with like the three, right? We're voting between 2 elementary schools or 3. We had a lot of discussion around that too. And so can we, not only language of F, but I'm hoping this work can also be used for future. So can we include, we understand there may be 3 in 5 to 10 years or whatever, may need to be faced with this. This is what this group may be identified or could see. Could we add that under an F language?
Yeah, this is the point where I think you could give us language that you're thinking about in your sheets, and then we'll do our best to try to figure that out. And like Aaron said, that's how I see it too, is like you might have 2 or 3 tables talk about the same thing. One option of saying it would be like this, or this. It seems like it's important. You want to include it, and then if so, then what's the option that best expresses that? I mean, Steve, to some degree, you said something like this earlier tonight about I think I'm going to say, when you said, I want people, from my view, to understand, this was you talking, I think, it's not necessarily maybe the end of this. This is a start because down the line. And so, so that the language used there might be part of, I think that could be helpful to the report, kind of as the framing piece. So again, this is the point where we, the planning team took a shot at trying to pull together without it being 80 pages, right? Like trying to take a start of some of what you all processed with knowing the recommendations will come the last couple pages, like we're figuring out here tonight, et cetera. But so what other language are we missing, et cetera? So that's the kind of thing. I do want to mention one thing, again, from Courtney. She's been able to text us here a little bit or chat with us here. She just asked the question about the IB program. She said, at Northwoods, is that something that we'd also want to talk about? Does that go beyond the role of this group, or is that something that the group would want to somehow speak to? What would be the future of that? What would there be a thought around that from the committee? So that's another one of those ideas you might want to suggest. We'll see. Again, right now, we got you something to respond to. We got some questions here. We got about, again, I want to give you, I think, the time. I'm not so worried about hearing back from you individually table because we're going to see what you got anyway. So let's just give you most of the time, if that makes sense. So again, we just have timekeeper and then scribe to make sure we capture this. And then we do want to adjourn by 8:30. So how about we'll say we'll give you about, let's see here, 35 minutes, then we'll check in how people are doing. So 35 minutes, fair enough? So maybe not the same scribe for the second sheet. You can figure that out on the table, but 35 minutes, hopefully you have things that contribute. We'll check in then. Thank you. It looks like, in checking with the tables, people have the input that they wanted to get tonight on the draft report. So thank you for that. We'll look forward to that. Both submissions. So please make sure your QR forms are at the end. Your, again, scribe reports. We're pretty much going to be focused on our next meeting, which is actually quick. It's a quick turnaround. It's 2 weeks from Thursday, I believe. So the last one was same month, but it's quicker turnaround. So we got a lot of work to do on your refinements. We'll see you on November 2nd here, 6 o'clock. And thanks again for giving us your feedback before you leave, if you can. Have a great night. Really appreciate your efforts. Safe drive home.